Ashley and Kristen and Brady and Adrian, Melanie, Natasha, Taylor, Mr. Anstey, Mr. Patey, Pastor Patey, Blair, Haley. It's good. Mr. Curtis Andrews. Hello, Ashley. Hi, Jeanette. Hello, Mr. Noel George. Good to go on a bike ride with you. Mr. Sims, Pastor Parsons, famous from Bethesda. Hey, Brady. Hello, Sherry. Oh, Barb. I know, George, I was off. Noel, I was off today. It was good. Hello, Miss Taylor. Pastor Anstey. Oh, we even have representation from Rocky Harbor. Brother Ball is in the house. Yes, indeed. Oh, Alvin. Good evening, Justin. Hello, Troy. Oh, Miss Abigail Kennedy is on. Sarah Flynn, Pastor Jamie Warren. Ah, that's good. Oh, Tony Curtis, long time no see. Thank you, Jamie. Cuteness has never been my issue. Pastor Perry used to say that when people would tell me it was looking good, he would say, that's never a problem. Pastor Cram is with us. Pastor Jordan Harnham himself, all the way from Milton, Ontario. Yes, indeed. So my purpose tonight is twofold. I wanted to try out Facebook Live since I've never really done it. Rebecca does this when we're on Tyndale's campus and we're doing chapels and such. Hi, Terry. And also, I'm interested in. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about what normal will look like for the church. Our governments are talking about easing restrictions, and it's my contention that church life will be different post-COVID. And I wanted to try this to see if anyone had any suggestions in the comments there about what they think this is going to look like going forward. Hello, Miss Charity. Good to see you. So, right off the bat, we know that people are more used to technology now. We're aware that churches have figured out how to do this. We're aware that people who might have been hesitant to get into an online presence have now jumped in, mostly because they had no choice. And I think this is a great thing. I think my contention is there's a couple of generations who live online. Latest stats are that we probably have the youngest generations, they say, are spending up to 9 hours a day online. And so for the church not to be online makes no sense. And there's been a lot of hesitance to that because it's a new thing for a lot of churches and pastors. But now, of course, COVID has forced us out. Steve Furtick, thanks, Ashley. Come on, Cram. Tell us what you know. And so pastors have tried this out, congregations have gotten used to it, and so now we all have an online presence. So that's going to impact us going forward because it's going to be really, really hard to go backwards in some senses. Once people have gotten a taste of online worship, it's going to be really interesting to see if and how we'll actually revert, as it were, back to church as normal. So we've got a couple lessons out of this. Pastors have learned that they can do it. People in the pews have learned that it is possible. I think we've also learned how much we valued actually getting together. So this is, to me, kind of running on a parallel track, like a train track. So we've learned at the one hand that yes, we can do a lot of this online, but two, we miss being in each other's presence as the body. So how that's going to unfold going forward is going to be really interesting to see. I wonder if anyone has any ideas. I would love to have a conversation about this, about the thing you think that will be different following this in terms of the church. I can't see everything just going completely back to normal when restrictions are lifted and when life, as it were, returns to normal. I think this is going to change the church, and I'm wondering if anyone has any thoughts in terms of that. Let's see who we've got on. We got Ira on. It's good to see Ira. Good to see you, Joe. Cody JW, Julian Wilson, Kennedy Fallow. Hello, Miss Kennedy. Justin, churches don't continue to have an online presence post-COVID will miss the opportunity to reach the very people they are trying to reach. I would say that's true, Justin. That's a good point. The question is, will churches continue to do an online presence with the Sunday gathering, or will one replace the other? And if we have to go back to the effort as pastors of doing Sunday services, as it were, who's going to care for the online piece, and how is that going to work? That's going to be an interesting challenge, I think, for sure. It's really interesting. We've also learned some things as the church about the buildings, because we've been literally forced out of our buildings, and yet we've continued to be the church. In some ways better, in some senses. I every Sunday morning track probably a dozen churches, and you watch some of them. You can watch how many people are tuned in, and there's no doubt that some of our assemblies are having a greater reach online than they would have had live in person. And so in no sense has the body been shut down. In no sense has the gospel been hindered. It's probably gone out by far to many more people, but we are missing the live component. So we've realized what we can do with online. And we've also realized that we don't have to always be tied to the building to do it. Mr. Harnham, imagine if the energy put into Sunday evening services alone was put into an online presence of some sort. Well, that's going to be an interesting discussion. Of course, we know many churches are and have struggled with what to do with Sunday evening. In some cases, it's a replication of Sunday morning. Some churches have abandoned it. Some churches have converted it into other things, more of a discipleship focus. So that's an interesting option there. Let's see who else we got here. Oh, we got Pastor Ball from Clarenville. Steve Grimes is in. Ryan, many churches will probably have to look at multi-services per Sunday due to social distancing. Yeah, that's probably true. There may be a requirement for us to only have so many in the building at one time. That's a good point. Miss Rebecca Grimes and Desiree Ashley, Next Gen Ministry is where my mind is. That's a really good point. And so when it comes to Next Gen Ministry, you're dealing with the generation there that is most comfortable online and is it's really native to them. But yet they need the interpersonal relationship. This is where the dual track are going to run, I think. Lauren, it'll be interesting to see if the culture of greeting will change. Yes, I expect that greeting one another with a holy kiss is not going to continue. In some ways, of course, this is an introvert's dream, because introverts don't always love the greeting time. Yes, come on, show me the likes. That's right. Greeting time, not an introvert's dream. Hello, Jeremy. Jamie's forced me to step out a little with online services. Jamie's been doing a great job preaching from his quad, although he does have a Maple Leafs jersey on at times, and so the anointing increases and decreases. You know, the quad brings it, and the jersey not. Sorry, Jamie. See the value in going forward is too big an influence to ignore? Absolutely. Smaller churches will have an advantage with returning to a building. Yeah, that could be true, Justin. Write another comment and tell me there what you mean. We're going to need a little bit of clarification there. Giving patterns, that's a very good question. Talk there, Jamie. I think for a lot of our people, giving won't change because they set aside their part and they give regardless. There will be some, of course, who typically give in terms of when they're present. So how giving will change is a very good question. Mr. Aaron Dillon joining us. Always good to have Aaron with us. Mr. John Hilliard. Pastor Orain is with us. Cliff Newberry is with us. Cliff I've known for a very, very long time. Beverly A. I hope churches are continuing online presence. People who I've invited to church over the years are actually watching online. Yes, that's true. Physical services are still important. It's of course, in terms of inviting someone, I think, I don't think we always realize how intimidating it is for the new person to come into our building. And to get a sense of that, I have done things like gone to a different denomination that's not even close to ours. So let's say attending Mass for the first time. And so much is new. It's really quite a challenge, and that's just, personally, and that's just another branch of Christian tradition. So for people who have no church background, coming into our buildings is a really big deal. And so this, I believe, has been an excellent opportunity for our churches to show our communities exactly what we're about. And they can do it from the comfort of our own home. So it's kind of like they get a test drive without actually having to, go through the challenge of walking up and joining us in our building. David Hazard, good to see you, sir. David Kenty. Oh, Craig Lane, Angela's with us. Sean Bowers is with us. Pernell, Brianna, Mr. O'Reilly. Good to see you all. So this is really a chance, and I tell you what I like about this is in certain places, so in our particular context here in Newfoundland, I expect our adherents outnumber our members by 3, 4, 5 to 1. That's people who are raised Pentecostal a generation ago or a generation before that. And some of them hold to a very tight view of what Pentecostalism, for example, is, and that is based on something 30, 35, or 40 years old. And many of them think we've not changed since. And so these online services are a wonderful opportunity to actually reach into the community and say, here's who we are today. You may like it, you may not like it, it may speak to you or not, but here's who we are. And who we are is not necessarily who you remember us to be when you were kicked out because you had bell-bottom jeans on or your hair was too long. And so you may be holding that against us and maybe assuming we're the same, but now that we're all online and you can see us from your laptop in the living room, this is the church's chance to come out and say, hey, we're not quite there anymore. This is who we are. Yes, Angela Parsons, indeed. Andrew Ball. I always like it when Andrew's thinking. I think churches are going to transition to more of a segment-style service as opposed to worship for 45 and preaching for 45. If only I could preach just for 45. People are liking having a variety of segments. Yeah, I agree. Our unspoken liturgy will change. Now, that's a really good point. Hello, Tim Menlo. Good to see you. I'd love to have a chat with you. And my sister... Good to have you on. That's a good point, Andrew. So what we've done now online is we have packaged the worship experience in a certain way. So we do a little bit of worship, and that's by necessity because we can't all get together to do a full service. But as we do that, we found that it's working pretty well. We worship for a while, we have a little bit of this, we have a little bit of that. And that it'll be really interesting to see how that colors what we're doing going forward when we are actually allowed to come back live. That's a really good point, Andrew. What are your thoughts on this global event providing a global opportunity to share the gospel with the whole world? Cliff, I think there's been no time better than this. The church has literally been pushed online, and most of the world now is able to access it. So, see, part of my nature is I'm always trying to see around the corner. So I'm trying to envision now, because my assumption is, and we all come at these things with assumptions. My assumption is that things cannot stay the same. They will not stay the same, because this shift has influenced how we're going to do church going forward. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think God is using this. God didn't bring this, but God always is working out things for the good, always working out things for the good. They weren't for the good, or there'd be no working to be done. But he takes what is not good and he works, he redeems. It's his redemptive nature. And he is redeeming this COVID crisis to the good of the church and the kingdom. And the question is whether or not we will get on board. Because what Isaiah says is, God says, see, I am doing a new thing. And then the famous question that I always come back to, do you not perceive it? So God can be doing the new thing and we not even be aware of what he's up to. So God says, I'm doing a new thing. And if there was ever a verse for this COVID crisis, I think it's this. I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? I'm making streams in the desert and ways in the wasteland. And that's exactly what he's up to. The Spirit is always going ahead, making a way in the desert. The Spirit is always going ahead. The church's job is to figure out what the Spirit is doing and then partner with Spirit. So it's not doing what we're doing and then asking the Spirit to bless us. It's discerning what is the Spirit doing and how can we partner. Now, there's never been a better time to go through this process than right now, because A, we have time to pray and discern and think. But B, we know God, because he's redemptive, is working in this. So what a time for the church to get on board this now and to discern what's the Spirit up to through COVID. What's the Spirit up to through this isolation? What's the Spirit up to through this being forced online? And how can we partner with it, with him? So it's a very different question than what are we going to do when the restrictions are lifted. So I'll leave it there. Let's see who we've got. Oh, we got a few more people. Katie, Bethany, hi Val, Short. Joe, that's true. I'm seeing people from my community who have never been in my church but are comfortable attending an online service. I just had a Lutheran ask me to come pray for her family. Yes, excellent. That's really good. Hope this pandemic reminds us that the power of the Spirit is not confined to the building. Yes, absolutely. It baffles me a little that people are going to fighting to park in the church parking lot instead of watching online. I can tell you why that is, Jamie, from my perspective. Because we use the language welcome to church, and we've long associated it with the physical property, and we've talked that way so long, and words have power. We teach things by our words, and we have talked that way so long, welcome to church, that people are fighting even to park in the church parking lot so they can go to church. And of course we know cognitively that we are the church, and we are the church, all of us gathered. There's 107 people here together right now, and we are the church right here now. So there's more than 2 or 3. Jesus is in the midst of us. But yet, you're right, people will fight to go to the building because that's how we've used language, and we educated people that way. Well, Mr. Darren Austin, long time since I've had you in my group. I trust you are well. Miss Leah, Very sorry to hear about what's happening in Fort McMurray with the flooding. Ashley, will that segmented approach to services shift our ability to wait on the Spirit's leading and to discern? My sense is that we are all going to have to get really good going forward, especially in light of what's happening in culture, at discerning as a lifestyle. And that is hearing clearly what the Spirit is saying to us in moment by moment. And I'm sure it's our goal as believers, but this is something we're really going to have to really wrap our heads around. And even if we do segmented worship, as somebody mentioned earlier, we're going to have to be able to move on the fly with the leading of the Spirit. Incidentally, one of the losses of Sunday night service is that it was a time when there was a lot of time to wait on the Spirit. And I'm old enough now that I'm looking at 50, not too far off, that it's the old saying, you never tear down a fence till you know why somebody built it. And to just get rid of a Sunday night service with no clear plan is not a good idea in my mind. Neither is it a good idea to get rid of Sunday night service and just transition to a pure teaching time, although we certainly need more teaching in the church. What I'm concerned about is we have lost our time when people would simply wait in the Spirit's presence. And we've proved at Tyndale at our chapel over and over again to people a lot of time to wait in the Spirit's presence. Turns out it will show up. Yes, Tim, interesting to watch online presence has generally been more spiritually focused rather than peripherals. I hope that as well. Hi, Doug Knoll. See you online. If God created everything, why did he create the virus? That's a very good question, Dustin, from your son, and I'm glad that you, having been well trained, are able to answer that for your son. Andrew Ball, as a pastor, this type of physical separation has made me more sensitive to the needs of those connected to our assembly who are too shut in or too sick to attend our services. Yeah, change of perspective. Perspective on this is perspective in life is just about everything. How you view something will always impact how you proceed next. And having God's perspective on things is one of our great challenge as a believer. Because I tell you what, once you change and you start looking at things from a different perspective, everything else changes with it. So, the simple one we see online is rather than being barred in the house, we are privileged to be in a home safe from this virus. We, many of us have to go out on the front lines and we're fighting this thing. So that little change in perspective from being I'm trapped to I'm safe, well, that's a very big shift in folks. Hello. Well, this Pastor Burnham, Sherilyn Noble. Hello, Mr. Rex. Good to see you. Kent Sevier. Always good to see you. Hi, Faith. Pete. Oh, Miss Rebecca Jensen, my faithful associate. Good to have you on. Keeps my most straight, and it is more than a full-time job. Let's see what we got. Thank you, Lyle. I appreciate all the prayers. Noel George, two aspects of the church going to be interesting. First of all, do people want a new thing, or are the church members just wanting to go back to the same way? Secondly, church leadership must embrace the opportunity for change. Yep, that's absolutely true. Some people, this is why I started this live tonight. I'm curious about whether or not people just want to jump right back into what was because it's comforting, or whether or not they are now open to something different, whatever that looks like. And I'm also curious as to how we as pastors and leaders will discern what the Spirit is up to in this kind of shift. Whenever there's my sense is whenever there's a momentous shift like this, whether it's caused by crisis or something else, the Spirit takes the opportunity to move, really move. The Spirit takes the opportunity to get in and to redeem and to, move some pieces around. So figuring out what he's up to and all of this is going to be really interesting. Hi, Taylor. I really admire Taylor and what she's doing in Arnold's Cove. I like the personal conversation nature of the live streams we see in rural Newfoundland. I don't think the answer in rural churches is to simply live stream. I'm not sure what it is, though. Yeah, I agree. I have been so impressed, man. We have seen people being unbelievably creative with their Sunday messages. We've seen Bible studies on wharfs and in boats, on quads, on Skidoo. I've seen. It's really put a fantastic visual to the idea that the church is alive and well everywhere. And the other thing that's really, really good is we have in our tradition for a long time had what we call the sacred secular split. So things we did on Sundays and around the building were sacred. And then in the week we sometimes lost track. What this has done has kind of really blurred that distinction. So we're seeing sermon from the seat of a snowmobile and a quad and a sister out in boat, and he is there being, the called of God on the water, sharing the word. And it really, really tells you that, and this would be a great point to really hear, the point of Pentecost was to take God out of the temple and the tabernacle and put him finally in God's creation. So God indwells the church by the Spirit at Pentecost. And sadly, within a couple of generations, the first thing the church did was build more buildings to put God back in. And this time is really a fascinating time of watching God push the church back out again, and we are seeing the word of God being preached from every locale and people connecting online like we are here tonight. And I can't think of a better picture of Pentecost in many ways than what's going on online right now around the world. So we have Pentecost for the 21st century, or Mars Hill for the 21st century. This is it right now. We are being live. And I'm really happy about that. I've long wished that the church would get out in the realm of where the conversation is happening. And whether you like it or not, Facebook and Twitter, Instagram if you're younger, and other apps, that's where the conversations are happening these days. Yes, they're still happening personally and in coffee shops, but they are happening right now. Jesus spent most of his ministry being with people. In 2020, it's possible our new online presence is the modern version of really being with people. I like it. Nicole Joanne, yes. It really does have the potential to be a beautiful thing. If we do this online thing properly and we connect, I really do think, I really believe God is in this. Living by the Spirit and with discernment moment to moment. That's a good word right there. Linda, who's joining me from downstairs, studying med school things. Pastor Elton, good to have you, sir. Jen Oxford, Marilyn Curtis. Hi, Marilyn. Good to see you. Hello, Kim. My grandfather said to me that there are going to be people who will say the devil is winning because he has canceled church, but through this pandemic, God has proved that he cannot be canceled. As a matter of fact, this has been such a great way to reach people who wouldn't normally attend church. I've had many people on my Facebook watch an entire live church service when they would not normally ever step into a church. It's really inspired and helped me appreciate, although, that through all of this, God still came and has won. Absolutely. That's exactly what's going on. So what's fascinating about the Christian life, if you want a bit of a life lesson from this, and the Bible often says that which was meant for evil, God has turned for good. That's exactly like this. So this virus comes. It's a terrible time really in the life of the world. But still the Spirit is always working. He's not responsible for that, but he is working always to redeem out of that. And we're seeing it all over, including in the life of the church. My Aunt Velda's online. She's looking forward to getting back working together. Yes, and certainly there's any number of people who really miss the personal connection, and the reason for that is that we were wired for personal connection. We're wired for two lots of connection. We're wired for vertical connection with God, and when you don't have it, there's a hole, and you're wired for interpersonal connection. Even if you're introverted, you're wired for some. And the not being able to physically gather it will shame you. Yeah, Jamie, that's a good point. I hope that the church rises in serving and connecting with their communities in more tangible ways, providing food, delivering prescriptions. Yes, this is a great time. Pastors and people, there has to be all kinds of creative ways to serve our communities in this time. So we're not in the building on Sundays, but there are still an awful lot of needs in our communities. But it's going to maybe take some asking around, and take prayer, take some discerning to determine, what are these needs and how can we meet them. And, we may be able to do a lot more in some ways in this time just by serving the community than we could have had in a great time of holding church services. So, something to keep in mind. Thinking about this. Thank you, Chad. I'm thinking a lot about this these days. How things are going to change. I'm really appreciating the conversation. I love how this has brought worship back in homes. Jacqueline Hillier. Yes, absolutely. That's been a fascinating thing to see families gathered and the parents with the children, and they're all involved in leading worship. That's a wonderful picture. That's a picture kind of like you get out of Second Chronicles, where it says they all came to the mouth of their tents, the mothers and even their little ones. And this has been a great time to really focus on family and family ministry. And now that I'm on that topic, let me throw this out to you. It's a biblical fact that the primary responsibility for raising children in the fear of God is the parents. It never the churches, and it never was the children's pastors. Shout out to all the children's pastors. Never was the youth pastor's responsibility. The primary responsibility for raising your children to God is the parents. And now the parents have a pile. Oh, there's all my children and youth pastor. Yes, look at all the hearts. And this, of course, has put all of you parents in very close proximity with your children. Sorry about that. And we're all appreciating teachers more. But to see the families gathered on Sundays and the children leading, and I've seen so many churches where you're having children read the scriptures and children participating, that's what this is. So let me throw this out to you. In some of the major Canadian studies that have been done, like Hemorrhaging Faith is one done by the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. I don't know if you know this, but the number one factor in determining whether or not a child will transition through youth ministry, through to young adulthood and beyond, and continue to serve God. Do you know what the number one factor is? And this should work perfectly for Pentecostals. The number one factor is an actual experience with God. It's not necessarily the home you were raised in. It's not how good your church was, although those things are important. A connection with a youth pastor is very important and ranks up there. But the number one thing that determines whether Johnny will transition from 15 to 25 to 35 years old still serving Jesus is whether or not Johnny actually met Jesus and had an experience with the living God, him, which is why for 20 years I've been such a fan of our youth camps and our children's camps, because that tends to be where a lot of them meet Jesus on their own terms and have an encounter with God through His Spirit. Rebecca, good comment. This is the perfect time to grow the church. So, parents, this is a good time for our kids to have a genuine experience with God, even in our own homes. Tyler Cram, anything good for supper today? Yes, sir. We have been eating very, very well, I must say. And I'll tell you more about that privately. Are you hearing any reports? Hi, Clara. Happy birthday to you. Any reports in your circle of people receiving the Lord or testimonies of healing or other ministry fruit? I am not hearing that directly. I expect some of our pastors have. I've seen some posts to that effect where pastors are saying people have received the Lord through our services, one thing and another. But I would welcome if you have that kind of testimony. Certainly share it. Hello, Tim Bird. Good to see you. Jeff Elliott. Good to have you on. Finally getting to bring the church into the community and not just expect the community to be brought to the church. Yes, sir. Well said. And because we had no choice. Marilyn Curtis, the role of the church is not just to sit and be taught. We are to go out disciples. Yes, I'm going to bounce off that now, Pastor Curtis, your father. The number one way to know if you are a disciple of Jesus is that you're making disciples. That's the basic test. Are you making disciples yourself? And so one of the things that the church building has done, and pastors will know this, is you can have, not always, but you can have an attitude where people come in as spectators and they spectate, and so they become an audience, and then the people on the platform become the performers, like a concert. And when you leave, you rate, well, the worship was this, or the song leader was that, or the preacher was this, good, bad, indifferent. I never got my $7 from my tithes. And now we're not really able to spectate quite in the same way, so we have been pushed out to go make our own disciples. That's good. Hello, Miss Moss. How should pastors, churches, leaders, Ryan Ball, safeguard themselves from a spirit of competition? That's a really good question, and one that I've been concerned about. I wrote a little bit about one of the problems with pastors being able now to go and see online that pastor there, this is how he or she preaches. This is how many people are watching her live stream. That's a really, really big piece, and it can certainly, this kind of atmosphere can certainly promote all kinds of insecurities, jealousies. And even though we say, and we all say it because cognitively we believe it, I do this for the audience of one, it's really, really hard to feel like you're struggling personally and watch your peer do something so very well. That's a really, really tough one. And to all of you out there who are doing their level best, but are right now in this moment, and this is a word for somebody maybe, act with insecurity, you need to know that God takes the things in you that sometimes seem your weakest and uses it to reach other people in ways that you can't fathom. In other words, there are some of you who are so hard on yourselves about how you do things and how you approach things and how you're not as creative as this or talented as that one, or you haven't got the setup of another one. What you don't know is that God can be using your transparency. God can be using your weakness. God can be using your very apparent brokenness to reach somebody else who is tired of what looks like a slicker presentation. I've already heard comments from people who've said, what I really appreciate is that the pastors, and I like this, the pastors often look a little uncomfortable in front of the camera because this is a bit weird. And I really love that about them, that they're willing to be so vulnerable and they're willing to put themselves out there and willing to talk into a camera and to try to preach and willing to try creative things, their quads and their skidoos and their boats and their rears. And our people are actually drawn to that sense of vulnerability about us. And our people are drawn to the sense that we're willing to do this even though we feel a little uncomfortable and even though we're not really, we may not consider ourselves the best. So don't despair God will use even the sense of weakness that you're portraying, but because you're faithful, He will use that to reach people who are looking for that very same kind of sense of vulnerability and weakness and transparency. So it's all good. Thank you, Bruce. I think we'll. Justin says 20 of our small groups have already moved online. Even members in their 80s are figuring out Zoom. Yes, it's very important to find ways to connect in this time. Great point. Crystal Patey, that's a good point. What we're doing in this time is giving the opportunity for many who have left the church for numerous reasons and have made it a point they will not be back to actually come back without actually having to come back. If that makes sense and you understand what I'm trying to say. I have been interpreting you, Crystal, now for many, many years. I don't know if it's the gift of interpretation, but it's something. And so I understand that perfectly. Yes, there are people, and this is more of an issue in a small town, a rural area, where they said, I'm not ever darkening the doors of that church again. And of course, people are watching to see if they will, and they're determined not to. And this has reached into their homes because they can watch us privately and see what we're all about, see what the new is all about, without having to, go through the embarrassment of going back on their word, as it were. That's a good word. We want to be leaders of our college. True. Good to encourage one another. That's good. Oh, feels we're moving from attraction to live stream. That's true. Live stream is a little bit of a different of attractional model. It's kind of a missional model that's into attraction. That's a very good point. My Aunt Muriel has joined us from my Alberta. That's wonderful. Hello, Mr. Gerald. Good to see you. Brother Ralph. I have an unsaved sister and 2 unsaved brothers who never go to church. They've been viewing our online services every Sunday. This has to continue. That's a great word. Yes, Mr. Gilbert has joined us. Mr. Penny was my teacher in high school and taught me to write English. And shortly thereafter lost some of his hair. What he kept turned white. Yes, he. Hi, Daryl. Crystal, we're having a good conversation. I've often found myself comparing who I am to our lead pastor's wife, who's truly one of the most wonderful women you could ever know. One day God spoke quietly into my heart and said, you have a different shoe size. Great point. Tanya, at times when we are most effective in our vulnerabilities, other than we operate only out of our certainties. That's one of the kingdom of God is upside down to the kingdom of the world. So Jesus says you want to be great, you're going to be less. You want to be first, you got to be last. You want to live, you must die. You want to be, in front of the line, you got to go to the back, And he flips everything. And one of those is he uses the weak things of the world to confound the wise. And he uses the weak to confound the strong. And all of us, me in particular, like to operate out of a place of certainty and a place of strength. Is pretty well how I'm wired. But I've discovered through mentoring students over these last number of years that it's the glimpses of any kind of ability, the glimpses of some struggle, or just shared suffering, or these types of that really open the door to the very powerful connection. So yes, if you're a leader, people look to you to have some sense of what you're doing. People look to you for competence. They look to you for some certainty. But to show in the moment that you're really not quite sure, or to show in the moment that, yeah, I struggle with that too, that's a very, very powerful thing. Absolutely. Clara, we got all kinds of people on. Hello, Miss Gold. Good to see you. And thank you. Appreciate your insight. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone else has any more comments. That was just a little experiment I wanted to try. I'm kind of curious about how church will change going forward. If you read through the comments, that's what we have been talking about. Wayne Wellman is unable to continue the discussion because he needs to go to bed because it is 10:26. Hello, Mr. Mark Locke up in Roddington. I've been watching some of your services, sir. You and your family. Always good to watch you sing. Anyone else? Discussion there on insecurity among others, and also discussion about variety. Anybody else with a comment on how you think church will change or what it means to go back to normal in the future? I'm going to wait another couple of minutes. If anybody else. Our theology of suffering must inform our theology of victory. Yes, absolutely. The problem, Cliff, is that Pentecostalism has not had a well-developed theology of suffering because we have relied on a theology of victory, and the challenge is in the Christian life that the victory often comes through suffering. It's how you grow. It's why, of course, James says, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith will develop perseverance. Perseverance must, finish its work, should become mature and complete, not lacking anything good. And very often we run from the things, I tell students, that God uses to make us stronger. And we could really use a theology of suffering again now. Vanessa, my cousin, a simple benefit has been for shift workers who always struggle with missing worship opportunities. We hope it never goes away. Yes, indeed. That's a really good point. If you've worked shift and you have often had to miss Sunday worship, now you get Sunday worship broadcast and recorded, and you get to participate all the time. I see my president has joined from Toronto. Good to have you online, sir. We're talking about how church has changed. Jared Noble. One thing I've noticed in some contexts with a presence of other denominations who had adherents identified by their family history or tradition whose churches are not now making the same reach. These wanderers are wildly surprised by our services. I wonder if the roots then aren't tied to an experience with God are going to be grafted into churches who are desperately now trying to follow the Spirit. That is a great point. Yes, see, all bets are off right now because everybody is online, and those who are not, you're kind of standing out now in many, many ways. Yeah, that's a good point, Jared. I got to think that some more. I think the world is shifting, and I think the church needs to shift with it this time as well. I'm not sure what the world will look like moving forward of the church, but I do think each will look different. Now, Angela, I want to jump off that. I always enjoy a conversation with you. Here's the advantage the church has. The world is going to change, and nobody really knows how. The church is also going to change relative to our ministry to the world, but we have an advantage in the sense that we are indwelt by the Spirit, and discernment has been given to us as a gift. And so while God will not, of course, forecast for us exactly what's going to happen with the stock markets or when schools are going to reopen or this stuff, we are not left just to drift and act. I think one of the challenges I've had in many cases with believers is we are far too often reactive. So a change comes and we react to it. And we don't really need to be like that. We can be more proactive because we are indwelt by the Spirit of God. And because we're indwelt by the Spirit, we discern the times and know what to do, like the men of Issachar. And so we don't have to be as reactive. We can be a little more proactive on the change that's coming. So we don't necessarily know what it's going to look like, but we don't have to be caught off guard, and we don't just have to act. How do we continue to foster the one-directional relationships that are being created in our online presence into two-directional relationships post-COVID? That's a great question, and that we'd really want to think about going forward. You see, from my perspective, part of our challenge here is not just having answers. We got to ask the right questions, because unless and until you ask the right question, you can't possibly come up with the right answer. And so one of the things for the church to be doing right now is to ask questions like one. Yes, Kelly Walters, we can eat a bag of core while we watch church. God has certainly blessed us in this time. Amen. Who else we got? Hi, Cordell. Good to have you. And Verna. Do you think that if we continue to stream, once we're allowed to gather together again, will we see a hesitancy in allowing manifestations of the Spirit, knowing it will be publicized? That's a really great question, actually. I've been a part of services where any number of really interesting things in the Spirit have taken place, and you had the sense, this is one of those times you have the sense that you had to be there. You really had to be there, because there's an atmosphere created with the Spirit that when these things take place, you're able to discern it in real time about what's going on, and to broadcast it and to people try to enter into something the Spirit is doing among a group gathered, and to try to enter into that at home, I think is going to be really challenging. That's a great, a really good question. Well, I think I will call our quits for there. I've been on now for 52 minutes. Thanks to all of you who joined. It's been a great bit of fun. How does one evaluate success or failure with online ministry? Certainly not by the numbers watching, because they fluctuate crazy. That's a really good question, Jeff. That's one we'd have to give some thought to. I imagine what all the online piece is doing is opening doors and building bridges and showing people our heart and who we are and what we're about, a passion for our communities and our passion for gospel and our passion for their well-being. And I think the bridges that are built, like you're doing right now, Jeff, will come as fruit in the future, but we probably won't get on the front end. So this is what's really hard, is that it's like sowing and reaping. We're sowing now online, and I believe we're going to see a harvest in the future through the bridges we've built, just showing people we care, and just by showing people we're normal. It's a sad thing, but there are people in our community who would do well to discover that many, not all of us by any stretch, but many of us are actually normal. And we can have a conversation with them about faith and about the future and about God, and not go overboard with all of the Christianese. And so the online stuff has been very useful for that, and it's I believe painted a new face, thank God, it would be my case, on the church and on our efforts in our communities. And I think that's going to come in the future, Jeff. I think we got to keep casting the bread upon the water. Keep casting the bread upon the water, and trust the Lord that His word doesn't return void. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think in 6 to 12 months' time we could have this conversation again and reflect on what we've seen and the good things we've seen and the fruit we've seen from this online time. Okay, that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. It was fun. We had a great conversation. Thanks to all of you who commented. And trust you stay safe and well. Stay in your bubble for Dr. Hagee's sake.